So, my mother works in an office her whole life and I know what it's like to be under pressure even on holidays. This isn't just a video for views, it's a story based on real experiences. We share this story so that you can recognize yourself and avoid repeating other people's mistakes. All names, companies, and addresses in the video are fictional, but the emotions are real. Let's go.
We were halfway through our milkshakes at a roadside diner in Sedona when my phone buzzed. The bright Arizona sun filtered through the glass, casting long shadows across the booth. And for a moment, everything felt perfect. My daughter, with her wide, excited eyes, pointed out a hummingbird outside, fluttering near the blooming cactus. But the buzz of my phone shattered the tranquility like a splash of cold water. It was Dylan, my boss of 6 years, now promoted to VP after marrying the founder's niece. His voice came through the receiver, tight and practiced, like someone reading from a script. "You left without formal approval. We consider that job abandonment." I didn't flinch. I just looked at my daughter, still focused on the tiny bird, oblivious to the storm brewing on the other side of the phone. I wiped my hands slowly, the grease from my fries leaving streaks across the napkin, as if time itself was stretching, elongating the moment into something more than it was. "I see," I said, my voice calm. Too calm. I wasn't rattled. Not yet. "Should I expect an official letter?" "It's already been sent," Dylan snapped, his tone cutting through the line like a blade. I heard the click as he hung up without a second thought. I didn't call back. I didn't panic. Instead, I raised my glass of root beer and clinked it gently against my daughter's. She smiled and leaned in closer, her voice a soft whisper against the hum of the diner. "Don't worry, Mom. I've got a surprise." I smiled back at her, the corners of my mouth lifting just enough to hide what I really felt. She had no idea what was really happening. No idea that the carefully laid plans I had spent years building might be about to come crumbling down in a single breath. But I wasn't worried. Not yet. It wasn't the first time I'd been on the receiving end of Dylan's sense of entitlement. He'd only gotten this far because of family connections, a marriage that had been more about business than love, and a series of lucky breaks. He hadn't earned the position. He had inherited it, and in doing so, he had no clue what it took to build the company from the ground up. He thought he could pull a power move by firing me for taking a few days off. But what he didn't understand was that he wasn't just firing an employee. He was firing someone who had bled for this company, someone who had sacrificed everything, my time, my energy, my personal life, for their success. I could hear his words again in my mind. Job abandonment. He had no idea what abandonment truly meant. My phone lay silent in front of me, the screen still dark, and for a moment, I just watched my daughter's face. She was excited, innocent, and unaware of the tectonic shift happening just a few thousand miles away. I could feel my fingers tighten around the cool glass of root beer, the bubbles rising in tiny spirals as I thought of how I'd played this game for years. Quietly, methodically, always in the background. "Mom?" My daughter's voice broke through my thoughts, her eyes bright and trusting. "Are we going to be okay?" I blinked, the words of Dylan's call fading into the background as I looked at my daughter's wide eyes. She had always been my anchor, the one thing that kept me grounded in the chaos. She had no idea what I was about to do. "Of course we are," I said softly, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "We're more than okay." For years, I had been playing a silent game, a long con with pieces spread out far beyond Dylan's grasp. And now, the game was shifting in my favor. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the cool, sticky surface of the diner table, and looked out the window. The hum of the world outside seemed to echo in my mind, reminding me that I wasn't just any employee. I wasn't just someone they could cast aside without consequence. There was always a price to pay. And for Dylan, he had no idea how steep that price would be. Please like this video and subscribe. It really motivates the team. As I took a long sip of my drink, my daughter's words kept ringing in my ears. "I've got a surprise." I had no idea what she meant, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of something powerful brewing beneath the surface. Dylan thought he was ending my vacation, but he was wrong. He wasn't firing me. He was setting something in motion that would change everything. And when the time came, it wouldn't be me who lost. It would be him. To be continued. 10 years earlier, when the company was just a scrappy nonprofit with a tech backbone, I was their third employee. The office was a dingy little space tucked behind a secondhand coffee shop with flickering fluorescent lights and cheap cubicles that smelled faintly of old carpet and stale coffee. There wasn't much money to go around and certainly no perks, but there was promise. Big promises. I had taken a salary cut, knowing that the bigger picture was worth more than any paycheck they could offer. My severance from a failed merger, hard-earned and bitterly obtained, went right into the company's account, helping to scale from humble donation drives to landing our first defense contract. It was a leap of faith. A risk. But I'd insisted on one thing: deferred equity, tucked inside a silent partner arrangement via a shell entity, Maple Trace Group. A clean, simple structure. No fuss, no flash, just a name on a document, a legal stipulation that nobody at the time paid attention to. But it was my insurance. Over the years, I never touched the shares, never even mentioned them. It was my quiet way of keeping a hand in the game without anyone knowing. A quiet reminder that, no matter how many times I was overlooked, no matter how often I was pushed aside, I had a place here. And that place was far more significant than any title or paycheck they could give me. The ownership logs, kept in legal escrow, notarized, triggered only by involuntary separation. I made sure that clause was clear. A single misstep, a single wrong decision by the company, and that silent partner clause would kick in, automatically transferring ownership to me. It was foolproof, and it was hidden under layers of corporate noise. No one would think to look for it. Dylan never read the founder's original conditions. He was too busy playing the part of the ambitious VP, too focused on the perks and privileges of marrying into power. But he never understood where that power came from. It wasn't in his blood. It wasn't in his marriage. It was buried under 1,000 little details that had been carefully overlooked for years. And one of those details was me. He thought he was playing the game. But I had already been playing it for a decade, quietly in the background while he strutted around in his shiny suits, thinking the world was his for the taking. He had no idea how much he had to lose. Now, as I sat across from my daughter, watching her sip her root beer and admire the hummingbirds, I thought back to those early days, the sacrifices, the risks, the moments when I had to decide whether to fight for what I deserved or stay quiet and bide my time. The company grew, of course. The tech backbone that we'd built expanded into new territories, into new sectors. We landed bigger clients, bigger contracts. We became the go-to for companies looking for innovative solutions. But as the company grew, so did the noise, the egos, the corporate chaos. And in that chaos, everything that had made the company what it was, the foundation we had built together, got buried beneath layers of flash and polish. But I didn't need the spotlight. I didn't need to be in the room when the big decisions were made. I knew where my place was. And now I knew that place was about to become the most important one of all. Dylan had no idea what was coming. He had no idea that the very thing he was so eager to control, his newfound power, was already slipping through his fingers. The foundation that he thought he could ignore was about to rise from the ashes, and he wouldn't be able to stop it. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to yell or scream or throw a tantrum. I just needed to follow the rules. My rules. The ones that had been written years ago. The ones Dylan never bothered to read. I smiled to myself as my daughter leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. I've got a surprise." And in that moment, I realized she was right. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about the legacy we were building together. And this surprise, it was just the beginning. Back in the hotel room, the air was still warm, heavy with the lingering scent of desert dust, and the faint hum of the air conditioner. My daughter was sprawled out on the bed, flipping through a magazine she'd picked up in Sedona. I had told her I needed a moment alone, but she didn't ask questions. She never did. I opened the travel folder I had kept tucked away in my bag, a simple manila folder with a few documents in it. Most of them were standard forms, contracts, receipts, the usual, but there was one piece of paper I had kept hidden for 5 years. I unfolded the page with deliberate care. It wasn't much, just one page, typed in simple, unassuming text, but it was everything. Clause 12B. In the event of termination without written cause, full equity transfer shall be activated via trustee. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I knew it by heart. I didn't need to reread it. The words were burned into my memory. But there was something reassuring about seeing it again, seeing the legal power I had quietly secured, the protection I had set up for myself. It was all there, clear, undeniable. I took a steadying breath and reached for my phone. On the back of the page was a QR code, a small, innocuous code that nobody would ever think twice about. But I knew exactly what it would do. I scanned it quickly, watching as the screen shifted to open a secure portal. The portal required one click to authenticate. A simple click, nothing more. And just like that, everything I had carefully set in motion, everything I had kept silent for so long, was activated. It didn't need a courtroom. It didn't need drama. It didn't need to be loud. It just needed a moment like this. A moment when the right trigger was pulled, when the right clause was invoked. A moment when I was left with no other choice but to watch everything I had built and everything Dylan thought he controlled begin to unravel. The portal loaded, confirming the activation. My equity was now officially transferred. The company that had once been mine was now fully under my control, slipping from the hands of those who had treated it like a toy. I sat back, absorbing the quiet, steady weight of the decision. There would be no need to shout. There would be no need to play Dylan's game of power. I had the clause, the documents, the legal right, and now the company was mine. The power was back where it belonged. The quiet hum of the hotel room seemed louder now, the soft whir of the air conditioner filling the silence between my thoughts. I could hear my daughter laughing quietly from across the room, unaware of what had just transpired. But she was right. She had a surprise for me. I could feel it, now more than ever. She was the future. She would inherit what had been built. And as I looked down at the screen, confirming the action had been completed, I realized that the next steps were already set. There was no going back now. The mechanisms had been set in motion, the pieces were already moving, and Dylan, he was already out of his depth. 2 days later, while we hiked Cathedral Rock, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the jagged red rocks. The air was thin and dry, the kind of dry that stung your throat with every breath. But the view was worth it. My daughter bounded ahead of me, her excitement contagious as she scrambled over rocks and pointed out every cactus flower in sight. I followed slowly, my thoughts elsewhere, my mind spinning in quiet circles around what had just happened. The mountain trail was peaceful, far removed from the noise of my phone, the noise of Dylan's call, and the noise of everything I had just set into motion. But as I reached for my water bottle, feeling the weight of the backpack press against my shoulders, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The familiar ping sliced through the calm like an unexpected storm. I pulled it out, unlocking the screen with the flick of my thumb. The first email caught my eye immediately. Subject: Urgent. Ownership certification request. I tapped open the message, my heart picking up pace. The second subject was almost identical, but with a sharper tone. Operational freeze pending review. The words sat heavy on the screen, but it wasn't the words that caught me off guard. It was the reality behind them. Dylan, with all his enthusiasm and newly acquired power, had set something in motion at the board retreat. He'd announced sweeping restructuring, new departments, budget shifts, and terminations. In short, chaos. But it wasn't the chaos that mattered. It was the fact that Dylan had overstepped, assuming he could change the entire structure without even bothering to check the foundation. The ownership portal had flagged a crucial event, the triggering of a controlling stakeholder activation. The moment the system recognized the shift in power, everything came to a screeching halt. The email chain piled up one after another, like dominoes falling. Legal teams scrambled. The system had flagged it all. The equity transfer had been initiated, and suddenly they were caught. What they'd thought was just a temporary glitch, a brief system hiccup, was now a full-blown crisis. Legal couldn't move a dime. Governance had to be verified. The trigger was official, and nothing could proceed without it being confirmed. I stopped walking for a moment, watching the shadow of my daughter as she moved ahead, unaware of the storm brewing behind me. She was carefree, like the world was still simple. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, everything had come to a halt. 1,000 corporate gears grinding against one another. The financial department was frozen, unable to process anything further. Meetings that were supposed to go ahead stalled. The operations team, set to shift priorities, was frozen in place. Legal was caught in a web of compliance checks and verification procedures. No one could touch anything without first confirming what had happened. The power shift was real, but it wasn't in Dylan's hands. It was in mine. And now, as the legal system slowly churned into action, they were left to face the ramifications of their oversight. I couldn't help but feel a small, quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about winning yet. It was about making sure the rules were followed, that the process worked as it was meant to. The clause I'd triggered had been set up not for chaos, but for order. It was a system designed to protect, to take the power away from those who thought they could control everything without understanding the system they were operating within. In the background, the gears kept grinding, but they were grinding against Dylan's ego now. And that was something no one could stop. On the drive back, the desert stretched out before us in endless dusty waves, the golden light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the empty road. My daughter had fallen into a quiet, contented silence beside me, her head resting against the window as she watched the landscape blur by. The hum of the tires on asphalt was rhythmic, soothing, but my mind was elsewhere, circling back to what had just happened. Dylan's bluster, his careless assumption that he could reshuffle everything without consequence. None of it mattered now. The pieces were already in motion. My daughter turned to me, her voice soft with that innocent curiosity only a child can hold. "Mom, do you want to stop for souvenirs?" I glanced over at her, her wide eyes still sparkling with the wonder of the trip. She was happy, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents shifting beneath our feet. I smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No," I said, my voice even, controlled. "I have a call to make." She didn't question it. Instead, she nodded and turned back to the window, her thoughts already far away from anything that had to do with business. But I wasn't thinking about the souvenirs or the trip anymore. I was thinking about the one call that would solidify everything. As soon as we got back to the hotel, I found a quiet corner, pulling up my contacts. The name was at the top of the list, Founder. I dialed the number and it rang once, twice. My fingers tapped idly on the table as I waited, the weight of what was about to happen pressing in on me. When she picked up, her voice was as smooth and measured as always. "Hello?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was the moment where everything would either fall into place or risk coming undone. "Are you behind this?" I asked, my voice low but firm, the question hanging in the air between us. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to make me wonder if she was deliberating how to answer. But when she spoke again, her tone was soft, resigned. "No," she replied, almost a whisper. "But I'm not stopping it either." I let the words settle before I spoke again, the calmness in my voice betraying nothing. "Then I guess we're moving forward." I could almost hear the shift in her breath, the understanding that nothing could be undone now. The decision had been made, my place was now secured, and there would be no turning back. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge in the clear sky above, I received the confirmation I had been waiting for. My trustee had sent the official packet to all directors. It wasn't a dramatic email, no fanfare, just a simple subject line that read, "Confirmation of equity transfer and governance update." But inside, buried under layers of legal language and formalities, was something that would change everything. Attached to the packet was a copy of the original partnership agreement, the one Dylan had never read, the one that laid out every single detail of ownership. A copy of the compliance audit records, painstakingly organized and meticulously filed. But there was one section in particular that caught my eye. It was flagged, highlighted in red, marked with a single word that carried more weight than anything else in the entire packet. Emergency Succession Protocols. I opened it slowly, my heart beating a little faster as the words on the page unfolded. It was all there, the plan, the structure, the irrevocable path that had been set in motion long before any of this had started. I wasn't just securing my place in the company. I was taking back what had always been mine. It wasn't a hostile takeover. It wasn't dramatic or flashy. It didn't need to be. This was a quiet shift, a controlled escalation that had been carefully laid out, step by step. And now, It was coming to fruition. Dylan's careless actions, his lack of foresight, had opened the door, and I was walking through it, calmly and decisively. The legacy I had built was now rising to the surface, where it would shine in the light it deserved. There would be no more whispers in the halls, no more overlooked details. The power was back in my hands, and as I read through the document, seeing the final signature line at the end, I realized just how long I had been waiting for this moment. The pieces had been in place for years, quiet, hidden, waiting for the right time. And now, that time had come. The meeting opened with Dylan trying to charm his way through a PowerPoint, as if nothing had changed. His voice was loud, confident, filled with a kind of arrogance that only came from someone who thought they had already won. He clicked through slide after slide, detailing the grand restructuring he had laid out, emphasizing the new departments, the revamped budgets, and the terminations he had decided would streamline operations. He had all the right words, all the right gestures, like someone who had practiced in front of a mirror until the performance felt real. But as he reached for the clicker to transition into the next slide, the chair cleared his throat. The sound was sharp, deliberate, cutting through Dylan's polished presentation like a knife through velvet. "We need to address line 3 of the agenda first," the chair said, his voice calm but commanding. Dylan faltered for just a moment, caught off guard by the unexpected shift. I could almost see the confusion flicker behind his eyes. He wasn't prepared for this. The agenda wasn't supposed to include anything that would undermine his authority. But as the chair nodded toward the legal team, the room shifted. The air grew heavier, the tension palpable as the papers were passed around to the board members. They began to read. The first document, the controlling interest line, the one that named me as the new majority stakeholder. It had been activated the moment the ownership transfer took place, official and undeniable. The silence that followed was thick, as board members glanced at one another, unsure whether to speak or to process what was happening. Then came the cause clause, the one that explicitly stated the reason for Dylan's dismissal. There it was, plain as day, underlined and highlighted for all to see. It was short and simple. Termination without written cause. Dylan's entire strategy, everything he had worked toward for the past few months, had been undone in a matter of seconds. The room was still. No one spoke. The members flipped through the pages, rereading the clauses, their faces slowly draining of color. Then, the final piece fell into place, Dylan's dismissal order. It was a formality, one that couldn't be ignored. The legal documents were clear, and once the board recognized that, the room began to shift once again. Dylan's mouth moved, but no words came out at first. His face flushed a deep shade of red as the enormity of what was happening hit him like a freight train. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The PowerPoint was still on the screen behind him, but the confidence in his eyes had vanished. "Wait, this can't be," Dylan stammered, his voice cracking slightly. He looked to the room, expecting someone to speak up, to somehow invalidate what was unfolding before him. But there was only silence. The founder, dialing in from New York, cut him off mid-sentence. His voice, steady and unyielding, came through the speakerphone. "You fired her. Now sit down." It was final. Unquestionable. Dylan froze. There was no defense. There was no room for his usual tactics. The numbers didn't lie. The paperwork was airtight, and the board had already seen everything they needed to see. The foundation he had thought he built, his power, his control, was slipping through his fingers like sand, and no amount of charm or manipulation would change that. The room shifted again, but this time it wasn't just the chairs and papers moving. It was the power. The dynamics had shifted permanently. Dylan's arrogance had blinded him to the rules of the game, and now he was forced to confront the cold reality of what he had done. "Sit down, Dylan," the founder repeated, this time with a quiet but unmistakable authority. Dylan's face twisted in disbelief. He didn't know how to process it, didn't know how to recover from the shock. He had underestimated the one thing that had always been in place, the quiet foundation that no one had bothered to check. He had thought he was playing the game, but the game had always been mine. He slumped back in his chair, and the PowerPoint slide behind him flickered to black. The room was still again. Only now, the silence was filled with the realization that everything had changed. I didn't ask for my old job back. I didn't need to. The company had become a different place than when I had first walked through the doors. when it was just me, working through the late nights and early mornings, building something from the ground up. Those days were long gone, buried under layers of corporate polish and ego, but the foundation I had laid, the quiet backbone of everything that had been built, was still there. It hadn't changed. It didn't need to change. So I didn't need to reclaim the title, the office, or the prestige. Those things meant nothing now. What mattered was restoring the company to its rightful course. I nominated a new managing director, a woman I'd mentored years ago, someone who understood the company's core values, someone who knew how to lead with grace and integrity. I had watched her grow, her quiet strength always cutting through the noise. She was the perfect choice to carry the company forward without the toxic chaos Dylan had introduced. Her name was already familiar to the board, and she stepped into the role with an ease that only came from years of quiet preparation. No fanfare, no speeches, just the clear, calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. The first order of business was payroll. Dylan had pushed for cuts, for a leaner team, for more automation, more outsourcing. It had all been part of his plan to streamline things. But when the numbers were reviewed, it became clear that the cost of his decisions had far outweighed any short-term savings. We reversed some of his changes. We reinstated bonuses for the teams that had been working tirelessly, quietly in the background, and who had been punished for doing their jobs well. The adjustments weren't grandiose or dramatic. They were measured, necessary. They restored a sense of fairness, of balance. Culture panels were also reinstated, a key feature that had been stripped away during Dylan's brief tenure. They were designed to ensure that every department was aligned with the company's core values, values that were about growth, inclusion, and respect. Dylan had replaced them with quick-fix solutions, focusing on short-term results that ultimately compromised the company's heart. But now, with the panels back in place, there was a slow but noticeable shift in the company's atmosphere. The chaos Dylan had introduced vanished quietly like a storm passing over. It didn't require speeches or grand announcements. It just required a return to what had always worked: quiet, steady rebuilding. The internal Slack channels changed overnight. Where once there had been whispers of complaints, frustrations, and complaints about the direction of the company, the tone began to shift. It wasn't overt. It wasn't loud. But the atmosphere changed. The messages started to reflect something more subtle. A quiet camaraderie, a renewed sense of purpose. And among the employees, the conversations began to turn toward something more profound. They whispered stories, not just about the daily grind, but about how calm can be lethal. How sometimes the most dangerous force in the room isn't the loudest, but the quietest. How those who take the time to listen, to observe, to build from the shadows are often the ones who can change everything. And how the quiet ones always have a backup. A plan, a strategy, a way out of the noise. In the weeks that followed, the employees who had once felt ignored began to return to their work with a quiet sense of pride. It wasn't about fixing what had been broken. It was about recognizing that the company's strength had always come from its foundation, not from the flashes of brilliance that had come and gone with Dylan's reign. The company didn't need to be saved by a loud, bold move. It needed a return to its roots, to the steady hands of those who had always held it up, even when no one was looking. And now, with Dylan out of the picture, the company was finding its rhythm again, quietly but steadily, like a melody that had been silenced and was now being played again. And as for me, I wasn't looking for applause. I wasn't looking for recognition. I didn't need the validation of being at the top again. I had already done my part. The real work was in the restoration, the rebuilding of the quiet strength that would carry the company forward. And in the stillness of it all, I knew that my quiet victory was the one that would last. I returned 2 weeks later. The office had quieted in my absence, but there was a certain tension hanging in the air, like a space between breaths. It was the kind of tension that only comes when something important has shifted beneath the surface, when the ground has been subtly but irrevocably rearranged. I didn't make a grand entrance. There was no need for speeches, no need for anyone to applaud. I didn't walk in with a team of press or a crowd of well-wishers. I just walked in with my daughter at my side, her small backpack slung over her shoulder, her nose already buried in a book as she searched for a place to settle. She needed a quiet spot to read while I signed some papers. Nothing more, nothing less. She hadn't asked me about the office dynamics or what had happened in my absence. She didn't need to. She trusted me without question. I didn't need to be the center of attention. That wasn't how I operated. The shift had already happened, and now all that was left was to let it settle into place. Dylan was gone. There was no fanfare, no exit speech. He simply wasn't there. The office, which had once echoed with his presence, his loud ideas, and his overbearing charm, was now different. Quieter, more focused. I couldn't help but notice the absence, but it wasn't as if anyone was mourning it. I passed his old office on my way to my desk, but there was no trace of the posters, the framed motivational quotes, or the glossy success mantras that had once filled the walls. Instead, there were simple policy binders, carefully stacked and organized. The clutter of ambition had been replaced by structure, by something solid and dependable. The company was already starting to feel like itself again. The chaos Dylan had introduced had been swept away, leaving behind the steady rhythm of a place that had always been built on more than just quick moves or flashy ideas. It had been built on consistency, on the quiet understanding that the real work gets done in the background. As I settled into my seat, reviewing the papers that needed my signature, one of the staffers walked past me in the hallway. He hesitated, his eyes flicking between me and the door to the conference room, where a meeting was about to begin. "Did you plan this?" he asked, his voice tentative but curious. I looked up at him, offering a small, knowing smile. "Just followed the rules," I said, keeping my tone casual. There was no need to explain further. The rules had always been there. Dylan just hadn't bothered to read them. He had been too eager to make his mark, to leave his imprint on the company without understanding that there were deeper forces at play, forces that were always in motion, even when the world didn't see them. The staffer nodded, as if my answer made perfect sense. He didn't press. He didn't need to. The shift was clear to everyone now. It wasn't about who had the loudest voice or the boldest ideas. It was about understanding the structure, understanding the system. And now that system was in place again. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic, but it was steady, and it was real. The office had shifted, but it had shifted quietly, without fanfare, without conflict. It had simply reset. And that, I realized, was the quiet triumph. The past was behind us now. Dylan was gone, and the company was returning to its roots, to what it had always been meant to be. That night, after dinner, my daughter handed me a small, crinkled gift bag. It was nothing fancy, just a simple brown bag with a piece of string tied around the top. But the way she handed it to me, quietly, with a proud little smile, told me it was something important. I took the bag from her and pulled out the contents. Inside, there was a printed photo of us at the diner, the moment we'd clinked our milkshake glasses together, the sun fading behind us. I smiled at the memory, the way everything had felt so carefree in that moment, before the storm of the last few days. But as I turned the photo over, a folded slip of paper caught my eye. I unfolded it carefully, and there, in her unmistakable handwriting, was a note in bold, red marker. "I applied for the business competition you forgot. They picked your plan. You won." I blinked, the words settling in before my mind caught up with the meaning behind them. My daughter had done what I had let slip through the cracks, what I hadn't found the time to pursue myself. She had taken the initiative, the way I had always taught her, the way I had quietly modeled in the background. I looked at her, a mixture of surprise and pride flooding through me. But before I could say anything, I noticed another note, taped below the first one. This one was more formal, printed neatly in crisp font. It read, "We're awarding your proposal full grant funding. Congratulations." I froze, the weight of it all settling over me in that moment. The grant. The recognition. My plan, the one I'd crafted quietly without the need for fanfare or self-promotion, had been chosen. And now, it was being funded. I looked up at my daughter, her eyes full of pride, but there was something else in them too. Something older than her years. She shrugged nonchalantly like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Told you I had a surprise." I let out a slow breath, a quiet laugh escaping my lips. In that instant, I saw it all, how she had taken what I had quietly built, the lessons I had passed on without even realizing, and made them her own. She wasn't just my daughter. She was my legacy, the one who would carry it forward in ways I hadn't even planned for. And Dylan? He thought he was ending my vacation. He thought he was taking everything from me by pulling the trigger on my time off, by dismissing me so carelessly. What he didn't realize, what he could never have known, was that his move had been the catalyst for something much bigger. He had accidentally handed my daughter her future. I looked down at the papers in my hands, the weight of everything that was to come settling in. The future was hers now, and in a way, it always had been. I had just been waiting for her to see it.